And let's continue with the ninth chapter of the third book of A Tale of Two Cities. The name of the book is The Track of a Storm. The name of the chapter is The Game Made. Mr. Lorry and Sidney Carton are talking together. Carton does not want Lucy to know that he is in Paris, and they start talking about their ages. Carton is 78 and realizes he's at the end of his life. Carton terminated the conversation here by rising to help him with his outer coat. "But you," said Mr. Lorry, reverting to the theme, "you are young." "Yes," said Carton, "I am not old, but my young way was never the way of age. Enough of me." "And of me, I am sure," said Mr. Lorry. "Are you going out?" "I'll walk with you to her gate. You know my vagabond and restless habits. If I should prowl about the street a long time, don't be uneasy. I shall reappear in the morning." "You go to the court tomorrow?" "Yes, unhappily." "I shall be there, but only as one of the crowd. My spy will find a place for me. Take my arm, sir." Mr. Lorry did so, and they went downstairs and out in the streets. A few minutes brought them to Mr. Lorry's destination. Carton left him there, but lingered at a little distance, and turned back to the gate again when it was shut. He touched it. He had heard of her going to the prison every day. "She came out here," he said, looking about him. "Turned this way, must have trod on these stones often. Let me follow in her steps." It was 10 o'clock at night when he stood before the prison of La Force, where she had stood hundreds of times. A little wood sawyer, having closed his shop, was smoking his pipe at his shop door. "Good night, citizen," said Sidney Carton, pausing and going by, for the man eyed him inquisitively. "Good night, citizen. How goes the Republic?" "You mean the guillotine? Not ill. 63 today. We shall mount 100 soon. Samson and his men complain sometimes of being exhausted. Ha, ha, ha! He is so droll, that Samson. Such a barber. Do you often go to see him?" "Shave always, every day. What a barber! Have you seen him at work?" "Never." "Go and see him when he has a good batch. Figure this to yourself, citizen. He shaved the 63 today in less than 2 pipes. Less than 2 pipes, word of honor." As the grinning little man held out the pipe he was smoking to explain how he timed the executioner, Carton was so sensible of a rising desire to strike the life out of him that he turned away. "But you are not English," said the wood sawyer, "though you wear English dress." "Yes," said Carton, pausing again and answering over his shoulder. "You speak like a Frenchman. I am an old student here." "Aha! A perfect Frenchman. Good night, Englishman. Good night, citizen." "But go and see the droll dog," the little man persisted, calling after him, "and take a pipe with you." Sidney had not gone far out of sight when he stopped in the middle of the street under a glimmering lamp, and wrote with his pencil on a scrap of paper. Then, traversing, with the decided step of one who remembered the way well, several dark and dirty streets, much dirtier than usual, for the best public thoroughfares remained uncleansed in those times of terror, he stopped at a chemist's shop, which the owner was closing with his own hands. A small, dim, crooked shop, kept in a tortuous uphill thoroughfare by a small, dim, crooked man, giving this citizen too good night. He confronted him at his counter. He laid the scrap of paper before him. "Whew!" The chemist whistled softly as he read it. "Hi, hi, hi!" Sidney Carton took no heed, and the chemist said, "For you, citizen. For me." "You will be careful to keep them separate, citizen. You know the consequences of mixing them." "Perfectly." Certain small packets were made and given to him. He put them one by one in the breast of his inner coat, counted out the money for them, and deliberately left the shop. "There is nothing more to do," he said, glancing upward at the moon. "Until tomorrow. I can't sleep." It was not a reckless manner, the manner in which he said these words aloud under the fast-sailing clouds, nor was it more expressive of negligence than defiance. It was the settled manner of a tired man who had wandered and struggled and got lost, but who at length struck into his road and saw its end. Long ago, when he had been famous among his earliest competitors as a youth of great promise, he had followed his father to the grave. His mother had died years before, These solemn words, which had been read at his father's grave, arose in his mind as he went down the dark streets, among the heavy shadows, with the moon and the clouds sailing on high above him. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, and whosoever liveth and believe in me shall never die. In a city dominated by the axe, alone at night, with natural sorrow rising in him for the 63 who had been that day put to death, and for tomorrow's victims, then awaiting their doom in the prisons, and still of tomorrows and tomorrows, the chain of association that brought the words home, like a rusty old ship's anchor from the deep, might have been easily found. He did not seek it, but repeated them and went on, with a solemn interest in the lighted windows where the people were going to rest, forgetful, through a few calm hours, of the horrors surrounding them, in the towers of the churches, where no prayers were said, for the popular revulsion had even traveled that length of self-destruction from years of priestly impostors, plunderers, and profligates in the distant burial places, reserved, as they rode upon the gates, for eternal sleep, in the abounding gales, and in the streets along which the 60s rolled to a death which had become so common and material that no sorrowful story of a haunting spirit ever arose among the people out of the workings of the guillotine, with a solemn interest in the whole life and death of the city, settling down to its short nightly pause in fury. Sidney Carton crossed the Seine again for the lighter streets. Few coaches were abroad, for riders in coaches were liable to be suspected, and gentility hid its head in red nightcaps, and put on heavy shoes and trudged. But the theatres were all well filled, and the people poured cheerfully out as he passed, and went chatting home. At one of the theatre doors there was a little girl with a mother, looking for a way across the street through the mud. He carried the child over, and before the timid arm was loosed from his neck, asked her for a kiss. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, shall yet shall he live, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Now that the streets were quiet and the night wore on, the words were in the echoes of his feet, and were in the air, perfectly calm and steady. He sometimes repeated them to himself as he walked, but he heard them always. The night wore on, as he stood upon the bridge, listening to the water as it splashed the river walls of the island of Paris, where the picturesque confusion of houses and cathedrals shone bright in the light of the moon. The day came coldly, looking like a dead face out of the sky. Then the night, with the moon and the stars, turned pale and died, and for a little while it seemed as if creation were delivered over to death's dominion. But the glorious sun rising seemed to strike those words, and burden of the night, straight and warm to his heart, in its long bright rays, and looking along them, with reverently shaded eyes, a bridge of light appeared to span the air between him and the sun, while the river sparkled under it. The strong tide, so swift, so deep and certain, was like a congenial friend in the morning stillness. He walked by the stream, far from the houses, and in the light and warmth of the sun fell asleep on the bank. When he awoke, and was afoot again, he lingered there yet a while longer, watching an eddy that turned and turned, purposeless, until the stream absorbed it and carried it to the sea. Like me! A trading boat, with a sail of the softened color of a dead leaf, then glided into his view, floated by him and died away, as its silent track in the water disappeared. The prayer that had broken up out of his heart for a merciful consideration of all his poor blindness and errors ended in the words, I am the resurrection and the life. Mr. Lorry was already out when he got back, and it was easy to surmise where the good old man had gone. Sidney Carton drank nothing but a little coffee, ate some bread, and having washed and changed to refresh himself, went out to the place of trial. The court was all astir and abuzz, when the black sheep, whom many fell away from in dread, pressed him into an obscure corner among the crowd. Mr. Lorry was there, and Dr. Manette was there. She was there, sitting beside her father. When her husband was brought in, she turned to look upon him so sustaining, so encouraging, so full of admiring love and pitying tenderness, yet so courageous for his sake, that it called the healthy blood into his face, brightened his glance, and animated his heart. If there had been any eyes to notice the influence of her look on Sidney Carton, it would have been seen to be the same influence exactly. Before the unjust tribunal there was little or no procedure ensuring to any accused person any reasonable hearing. There could have been no such revolution if all laws, forms, and ceremonies had not first been so monstrously abused that the suicidal vengeance of the revolution was to scatter them all to the winds. Every eye was turned to the jury, the same determined patriots and good Republicans as yesterday and the day before and tomorrow and the day after. Eager and prominent among them, one man was a craving face, and his fingers perpetually hovering about his lips, whose appearance gave great satisfaction to the spectators. A life-thirsting, cannibal-looking, bloody-minded juryman, the Jacques III of Saint Antoine. The whole jury as a jury of dogs empaneled to try the deer. Every eye then turned to the 5 judges and the public prosecutor, no favorable leaning in that quarter today. A fell, uncompromising, murderous business meeting there. Every eye then sought some other eye in the crowd and gleamed at it approvingly, and heads nodded at one another before bending forward with a strained attention. Charles Evrémonde, called Darnay, released yesterday, reaccused and retaken yesterday, indictment delivered to him last night, suspected and denounced enemy of the Republic, aristocrat, one of a family of tyrants, one of a race prescribed for that they had used their abolished privileges to the infamous oppression of the people. Charles Evrémonde, called Darnay, in right of such prescription, absolutely dead in law. To this effect, in as few or fewer words, the public prosecutor, the President asked, was the accused openly denounced or secretly? Openly, President. By whom? 3 voices. Ernest Defarge, wine vendor of Saint Antoine. Good. Therese Defarge, his wife. Good. Alexander Manette, physician. A great uproar took place in the court, and in the midst of it Dr. Manette was seen pale and trembling, standing where he had been seated. President, I indignantly protest to you that this... President, I indignantly protest to you that this is a forgery and a fraud. You know the accused to be the husband of my daughter. My daughter and those dear to her are far dearer to me than my life. Who and where is this false conspirator who says that I denounced the husband of my child? And we will pause there.